Being quick over one lap doesn't mean you'll be quick in races. So today, I want to answer a question from preseason testing. Who actually looked fastest in race simulations? And more importantly, who is leading the big four teams heading into 2026? And while we're at it, which team might secretly be leading the midfield? I'm MJ, and welcome to MJF1. Before we dive in, a quick note about the data. This analysis is supported by data sourced from the OpenF1 API, and I've built a data model on top of it to extract insights that aren't obvious from the timing boards. I've also confirmed the corrections of the data with the API team, although some laps are still missing from the dataset. For example, in this visual, you can see Carlos Sainz is missing laps from lap 97 to 127 on day 3 of testing 2. So the data isn't perfect, but we still have enough to learn from it. Before we get into the good stuff, I want to quickly show you how I prepared the data, because you shouldn't just take my word for it. I've pulled stint information and granular lap data for every driver during testing. Using those stints, I focused specifically on race simulations. But identifying race simulations isn't always straightforward, so here's the criteria that I have used. I've looked at consecutive runs of more than 6 laps, tire compounds where they were not unknown or testing tires, removed outlier lap times which usually occur at the beginning of race simulations, and calculating the average lap time across the stint. This should give us a good indication of who was consistently fast during long runs. Now, the paddock seems to believe that Mercedes and Ferrari are the favorites for 2026. So by the end of this video, I'm going to make a prediction based on the data. We'll go through key insights from all the 6 days of preseason testing in Bahrain. Starting with this view of all drivers in their race simulation laps. A quick tip for reading this chart: lower is better. If a driver's line sits closer to the bottom, it means their lap times were faster. The peaks you see represent laps that took way too long, usually due to traffic, cooldown laps, or other interruptions. For example, George Russell had several spikes on day 3. These are outliers, and they are not representative of race pace. You can see the same thing here with Esteban Ocon. That's exactly why those laps were removed from the dataset. If you want to see how I removed these outliers using Python, let me know in the comments. Now, one thing to keep in mind, the fastest race lap from 2025 Bahrain Grand Prix was set by Oscar Piastri, and it was a 1:35. So this gives us a useful reference point. On day 1, Red Bull and Max Verstappen immediately showed up prepared. Honestly, it almost reminded me of 2022 testing. Back then, everyone was bouncing around with porpoising, and Red Bull just looked completely comfortable. But it's testing. We always have to take things with a grain of salt. Max settled into race simulations around 1 minute 38 on average, roughly 3 seconds off the pace. And the paddock reaction was interesting. A lot of people believe Red Bull is sandbagging, running the engine lower, hiding performance, not trying to look too strong. And you know what? We'll test this idea later when we look at average speed traps data during race sims. But first, if you're enjoying this so far, please consider subscribing. On day 2, Red Bull continued to look very comfortable, but it still felt like teams were running at well below maximum performance, probably somewhere around 70 to 80%. Testing is always a bit of a poker game. Day 3 got interesting, because suddenly it looked like Red Bull didn't want to be the favorites anymore. And honestly, I get it. It's much better to start the season as the underdog climbing up than the team that everyone expects to dominate until it's Q3 in Australia. But there's another name that started to appear in the data: Isaac Hedger. his race simulations actually looked very solid. I'm very curious to see how this kid develops in Formula 1. And yes, I'm still working on that Rookie of the Year video. And moving on to testing 2 day 1, Isaac Hedger once again showed very strong race simulation pace. At this point, you can already see which team is showing to be the true favorites. Alright, now let's talk about the midfield. And yes, I'll admit it, I give 2 Fs about these guys. Maybe Williams and Checo. But the real question is, which midfield team actually looked the fastest? Looking at these squiggly lines, the one sitting lowest should represent the fastest average race pace, and that team was Haas. And this might be the answer to one of our questions. And this tweet might actually have been onto something. Now, when we zoom out and compare the top drivers, Max Verstappen's race simulation actually looked the most stable. Not necessarily the fastest, but incredibly consistent. However, on this specific day, Lewis Hamilton in the Ferrari absolutely dominated the race simulations. In Formula 1, just like Q3, last impressions matter. And on the final day of testing, Mercedes suddenly reminded everyone who they were. They produced some very strong race simulation runs, followed closely by Ferrari and then McLaren. Interestingly, I didn't pick up any significant race simulations from Red Bull that day, which could mean 2 things. Either they were running different programs or they simply didn't feel the need to show anything. And now here's the full view across both tests and all days combined. First of all, look at some of the rookies during test 2. That's genuinely impressive. And when you zoom out, the top 4 teams actually look extremely close to each other. But remember earlier when we talked about speed trap averages during race sims? Because here's the data. And once again, Red Bull appears to be the fastest through the speed traps. So either they were really moving faster out there, or the other teams are doing an incredible job at sandbagging. Based on everything we've looked at so far, here's my prediction for the early 2026 pecking order. It's gonna be Red Bull, Mercedes, I know, Ferrari, McLaren, and then leading the midfield pack, Haas. Now obviously, testing results depend heavily on what programs teams were running that day, but hopefully this gives us a rough idea of the competitive order heading into the first races. Let me know what your predictions are down in the comments. Who do you think will actually come out on top when the lights go out in Australia? I think this season is going to be a fun one. Thank you for being here. Catch you in the next one.